This is one such pet-sitting haunt. I was caring for 2 cats in a gated community. The house was very large and kind of outdated. There were dusty pink walls with matching wallpaper and lampshades. When you first walked in through the front double doors, there was a staircase right in front leading to the open landing. This looked out over a sitting area with the formal dining room right below. 2 of the litter boxes for their cats were in the master bathroom off the bedroom. I usually started in there, cleaning out the litter boxes, putting fresh food in the bowls and fresh water. I need to mention, I always went to this house in the day because it had such an unsettling feeling. Not frightening, just a bit off. A lot of doors, windows, and outdated furnishing. It just added to the uneasiness of the place. After finishing downstairs, I went upstairs to clean the litter box in a bathroom. I checked for one of the cats that usually hung out in one of the bedrooms under the bed. I made sure she was all right. I decided to use the bathroom in that bedroom area. I left the door open because it was just me and the cats. Plus, I wanted to keep an eye out for any weird happenings. It was just that kind of atmosphere that something could happen at any time. While in the bathroom, I heard the garage door that opens to the laundry area downstairs open. It was possible to hear noises because of the openness in the layout of the house. So, my first thought was that someone must have come home sooner than planned. I then heard footsteps cross the kitchen, through the breakfast area, into the living room, and then I heard the TV turn on. I was washing my hands, getting ready to go down and let the owners know that I was in the house, when I heard the heavy footsteps of what I assumed was the man of the house walk through the formal dining area into the master bedroom and shut the door. I went downstairs. All the hair on the back of my neck started to bristle. I felt that something had shifted in the air. I walked into the living room, and the TV was indeed on. I checked the garage, but there were no cars. By this time, I was moving very cautiously, sensing things weren't as they should be. I mustered up the courage to go knock on the master door, because the house was my responsibility after all, as I needed to make sure that someone was home. I knocked a few times. No answer. Finally, I cracked the door, and the other cat came flying out past me and bolted up the stairs. I walked into the room, and it felt heavy. No one was there. The hair on my arms stood straight up, because I could feel someone was in that room with me. The sun was filtering through the windows on one side of the room, and the pinkness of the walls cast eerie shadows across the floor and into the corners. I stood frozen, knowing something was going to happen, and not wanting to see it. I felt like I was in a vacuum of nothingness. No sounds, no movement, nothing. It seemed to last for minutes because of the unnatural feel of it. All of a sudden, a shadow moved across the wall, and it felt like the air was sucked all out. I had to close my eyes to try to keep upright and not bolt mindlessly into a wall or door. Slowly, the feelings dissipated. I then began to notice the sound of the ceiling fan, and began to feel movement of air. Cautiously, I opened my eyes, and the room was normal. This wasn't the first time this has happened to me, and I'm sure it won't be the last. We live in an area that was used for cattle drives up to Kansas City, and a lot of the different Native American tribes inhabited this area. People have been dug up accidentally while they were putting in the tollway. It has a rich history, and I'm sure some tragic endings. Make no mistake, being a pet sitter can be a haunting job. This is a story from Dawn in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Is something following me? It all started when we, my now ex-husband, moved into our house. It would be 15 years in October. Strange things like lights turning on and off, odd noises, especially from upstairs in the bonus room over the garage. The subdivision is about 25 years old, give or take a few years. My house was a bit newer, the last phase built. It was about 1 to 2 years old when we moved in. My dog would go upstairs constantly. We would find him sitting and barking at the corner of the room. We got a second dog, and she would do the same. They would also constantly go into the backyard and together dig at the same spot. Now I know dogs love to dig, but it was in the same place over and over. This went on for about a year. We just accepted it, along with the strange noises, them barking at the corner upstairs, and seeing objects or figures out of the corner of my eyes. I was thinking that if there's something here, it's not harmful or harming us, so I'm just going to live with it. For years, not much else happened, until we divorced, and I decided to put the house up for sale. It all started again. I have a baseball hat that I wear, and I put it on the shelf. A few minutes later, I would go into the closet and find it on the floor. This happened about 10 times, putting the hat on the shelf and then finding it on the floor. After a while, I decided not to sell the house and instead refinance it. Then everything stopped. And the reason I mention that is because when I was in the 8th grade, I moved in with my dad and stepmom. There were several things that would happen in that house. Lights would turn on and off in my bedroom. There would be strange noises. The doorbell rang in the middle of the night with no one there. These things happened very frequently. In fact, my stepmom called me when I got home from school, and she told me that she had contacted a priest to come bless the house. When she told me this, I was standing by sliding glass doors. Suddenly, the glass doors shattered. After all that, nothing else happened. After all these years, I've wondered if something may have attached itself to me and followed me. I don't know. I know this sounds crazy, but I promise you, this all really happened. There has to be another realm. Something. This story is from Cass in the UK. Little girl at the top of the stairs. When I was 16 years old, I lived in a sort of youth hostel for young adults, aged 16 to 25. At that time, I lived on the first floor and shared a cluster with 3 other people. The hostel housed up to 47 residents, and there was also a staff on site, support workers and security, to look out for us 24/7. We all knew each other at this place, and there were a whole host of characters living there. But one thing was common for all of us: the stairs. The building had 4 floors, including the ground floor, And very soon after moving in, I would not go to any floor above the first unless I had someone with me or the lift was switched on. In the evening, the lift was turned off so that people could sleep. The reason for this was that if you ascended the stairs between the first and second floor, then the terror ensued. From the moment of taking that first step, everyone would scramble up the stairs. I'm not talking about grabbing the rail and running up the stairs. I mean trying to move so fast that you were using your hands to drag yourself up the stairs. And that's because it felt like something was chasing you, and there was no way you were going to let it catch you. A few months later, it was in the middle of the day, I went up to the 4th floor to visit a friend. The lift was off for that day for maintenance, so I had no choice but to take the stairs. Like clockwork, I walked up the first flight, scrambled up the second, and then was at ease for the third flight. Once I reached the 4th floor, I saw a little girl standing at the entrance door. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She had long hair, kind of dirty blonde color, a little white summer dress with tiny blue flowers all over it, and bare feet. I needed to swipe a card to go through the door, and I wasn't able to let the little girl through, as I could get in a lot of trouble. Children were only allowed in the lounge area downstairs when visiting. So I just stood at the top of the stairs and tried to coax her down instead. "Hey, little one, are you lost?" I said. I got nothing back, not even recognition that she had heard me. "Are you looking for Mommy or Daddy?" Still nothing. "You know you can't be up here, right? We need to go back downstairs. Come on, I'll take you." I put my hand out to take. At that moment, she turned her head in my direction, but was looking over her shoulder as opposed to looking at me. Then she screamed. I jumped out of my skin and looked behind me. There, in the brightly lit staircase up in the corner of the ceiling, I could see what looked like a shadow, but denser, and it spread out from the corner across the ceiling. I was suddenly engulfed in the feeling I got whenever I tried to take the stairs between the first and second. I turned to the girl, ready to pick her up and run down the stairs, and she was gone. I looked back over my shoulder, and the shadow was gone too. There was no way she could have gone through that door, as she would have needed to swipe a card, and the door was really heavy. There is no way she could have gotten past me. I was blocking the stairs. When I recalled this story to one of the staff, they said that when they do their nightly checks, they would take the fire escape stairs to reach each floor, as they had seen the same girl playing on the stairs or simply standing at the 4th floor door. She isn't the first I've seen, but she was certainly the first child I had seen, and it freaked me out. And the next story is from Danny in the UK. The maid at Christchurch Mansion in Suffolk, UK. When I was 7 years old, I attended a school trip to a historic mansion in Suffolk, UK. This mansion is known for its ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences. I wasn't to know this at the time, as I was so young. It wasn't until my later years that I learned of the other sightings that had been reported. I remember it as being a bright and sunny day. All of us were in high spirits and excited to explore this grand building. I remember being amazed at all the wall hangings, the furniture, and, being a young boy at the time, I was very much taken by the suits of armor and weaponry. While we were wandering the halls, I lost sight of my teacher, and I started searching frantically. When I went to look behind me, I saw a lady with her back to me. I thought it was my teacher, so I breathed a sigh of relief and instantly felt safe again. The lady was walking down the corridor, so I followed, as I didn't want to get lost again. Then, the lady turned right into one of the rooms. I noticed there was a rope barrier across the door that said, "Do not enter." I didn't pay any mind to the sign, as I figured if that was the way my teacher went, then we must be permitted to go there. I followed her into the room, past the rope barrier. About 3 or 4 steps into the room, my teacher called from the doorway that I had just walked through. I whipped around and saw my teacher standing behind me. I turned back to the lady I had just followed, and she was gone, despite there being no other exits. My teacher was trying to usher me out of the room, telling me that we were not allowed in there, and saying that it was time to go, and we had to get back to my other classmates. I spent the next 20 years trying to piece it all together. That's when I recalled her outfit. She was wearing a black dress with a white apron tied around the waist, a white bonnet on her head, with her hair pulled back. I've been back to the museum on countless occasions, speaking to staff and inquiring about the lady. And it was confirmed. Others have seen the same maid wandering the halls. I sometimes wonder if the maid appeared to me because she knew I felt lost. Perhaps she was guiding me back to my teacher. And after reading that story, I did a little research on it. And on a website, the URL is, it'll be on anythingghost.com. You can get the URL. But here's what they wrote about, just a little segment of their story. Sightings include those of a young woman who appears to be in her late 20s and early 30s, and who appears to be wearing Edwardian dress and is seen dancing and laughing with 2 children in the area of the upstairs art gallery. Believed to be a maid who lived and worked in the mansion with her 2 children, her hair is piled up on top of her head, and she is seen twirling with the youngsters as if playing Ring of Roses. And the next story is from Christine in New York. Pine Ridge Dude Ranch. My entire family loves going on this dude ranch that has been around since the 70s. We started going there about 4 years ago. It recently went into new ownership, so we wanted to support them, and as such, we have been going more often. They are in it to help the animals that they save, and not just for the money, and it shows. There are 14 members in my family, my children, my sisters, and their kids, as well as my parents, who are in their 70s. My dad, Jim Weiss, who lives in Staten Island, has always said the dead are dead, leave them alone. But he is a psychic. We all call him the negative psychic, because although he is 99% correct with his predictions, they are usually predictions that are something like, you'll be having a hip replacement, or cataracts, or you will divorce my ex-husband. Of course, he does a lot of positive stuff too, like when I was going to meet my current husband, and what he will look and sound like. But back to the story. At breakfast on the second morning at the Dude Ranch, my dad told me that the night before, a blonde, heavy-set woman in her 40s was tapping into him in the middle of the night. This caused him to wake up. But after a few seconds, she disappeared. I asked my mom if this was true. She never jokes about this stuff, and she validated the story. Later that day, my dad was giving me a psychic reading in the lobby of the Dude Ranch. He started yelling loudly, "Get away from me! Get off of me! Get out of my head!" I, of course, was totally embarrassed, and I asked him what was wrong. He said that the lady from last night was in his head. He then began giving her a reading about the past. She was an alcoholic who died in her 40s in the year 1948. She showed him a grave of her young daughter who had died. Her grave was close by on the property. She showed my dad her farm, now the Dude Ranch. My dad said the name Cassandra may be the daughter's name. After all this, I went and asked the new owner if there was a history of any ghost appearances. He laughed, so I knew there were. The owner continued on by saying that there were 2 headstones right behind the tennis courts, and one of them was of a young child. This was the first time someone who has passed away has tapped into my dad. He had always believed in his phrase, "The dead are dead." For more information on Christine's dad, he's an author, a life coach, and a psychic consultant. That's what his website says. But you can visit his website at www.jimweiss.net and JIMWEISS.net. And .com is something completely different, so don't go to jimweiss.com. It's jimweiss.net. And she goes on, "My dad started having psychic visions as a child and was punished by his Irish mother. He would say, 'Aunt Helen is going to die soon.' Maybe his mom thought he was the devil or something, so he kept a lot of predictions to himself for a while. And the police used him about 30 years ago to solve a murder. Christine asked her dad about that time. He helped solve the murder. And he told her that a young lady was found dead on Page Avenue in Staten Island. My father told the police that he saw, with his psychic ability, I guess, a neighbor shoot and then stab her. Suspicious of how my father knew so much about the murder, they were going to make him a suspect, but he had an alibi. He was in school during the murder. They later caught the guy using my father's description, and my father found out that the killer lived next door to him." Story 2. I was staying at my boyfriend's house about 10 years ago after my divorce. He lives in a beautiful Victorian house with a wraparound porch in Tappan, New York. I would stay over once in a while and on weekends. He collected antique swords and other antiques. One night, when we went to bed, I woke up about 1 a.m. I looked across the room and noticed a white figure. It was a lady, dressed as if she was from the 1800s. She had on a big dress and an apron. She was gliding across the room, looking forward. I looked at her, and she looked at me. It felt like we made eye contact, and I knew she was angry. She then proceeded to glide faster toward me, and I felt like her hands were around my throat, and I couldn't breathe. I woke up my brother, and she disappeared. That was the last time I slept there, but it still scares me to this day. My boyfriend said that he had always felt a presence in the house, and keeps a sword right next to his bed, just in case he needs it. I personally think the old lady that I saw believes that it is her bed, and no other woman belongs there. Well, she can have it. Next up is David from New Jersey. Texts from the dead? Something strange happened to me in January of 2017. I was going through a very stressful time and suffering from depression and anxiety. For the first time in many years, I had thoughts of suicide, and this was very frightening. During this time, I had some paranormal experiences, one of which was a strange texting incident. One evening, when I was feeling very low, I was texting with a friend, and during our conversation, a series of random and indecipherable texts came through from my friend's phone. While he was texting me, someone, or something, began texting on his phone. In between these strange, nonsensical texts, he messaged me that it was not him who was typing. He had no idea what was going on. He was freaking out because he was watching the letter buttons flash and type by themselves as the phone was in his hand. My friend stopped using his phone and switched to his laptop. The phantom text stopped after that. We still have no idea what it meant, but it was obvious that something or someone was trying to get through.
Hi Lex, my name is Stephanie. I'm a longtime listener and a first-time storyteller, and I am pretty excited to share my story with you and your listeners today. I grew up in a small town called Enid in the state of Oklahoma, Midwest, super boring all the time. And when I turned 16, I went out to get my first job so that way I could afford to get a car. So, I'd be able to drive out of town, go up to the city and stuff. I went and applied to work at this pharmacy that wasn't too far from my house. The name of the place is Evans Pharmacy. You can look it up. You can even find a bit of background to this story. When I started working there, I worked in the actual pharmacy part as a cashier. I also did some stuff in the back room, like stocking, pricing, general inventory management, things like that. And I like to think that I am a very sensitive person to the paranormal aspect of the world around us. Ever since I was a child, I've always been very sensitive to new places and new things that we go and do. I can kind of feel the energies that a certain place has. I'm a longtime sufferer of sleep paralysis, lucid dreams. Like, my mind is very open to the world around me. Well, my first time I ever worked there during the night, because it usually closed pretty early, and we had to stay to help stock and inventory. Well, in the back room, I got this really nasty feeling. Like, the back room of this place, it was dark, it was dank, the lights overhead always seemed to flicker all the time. Just a very creepy room to be in. Well, it was Memorial Day at the time, and I was the only person in the back room because I was supposed to help stock Memorial Day flowers. The big fake ones that come in the boxes. For people who don't know how palleting works, when you get product into a store in mass quantities, they pallet the things up to be shipped. So there'll be a big wooden pallet, and they put the heaviest product at the bottom, and then they take this really thick saran wrap and they run it all the way around over and over again. And then they'll put the lightest things to the top and they'll run the saran wrap around it. So that way it has no way of falling over. So this pallet of Memorial Day flowers was really tall. I would say, probably 9 feet tall, and very, very heavy. Like, no way this thing could ever get shoved down. Well, I went back there to start ripping open the pallets, and I hadn't quite gotten to that one yet. And I was standing back there. I'm a teenager. I had my phone out because nobody was watching me, doodling around on my phone, doing whatever I did at the time. And I remember getting this gross feeling that came over me. Like, almost like, I don't really know how to describe it, like a malicious type feeling. Like, that look in somebody's eye that somebody gets before they do something they know is wrong. If that was a feeling, that's how I felt. And that pallet that I was standing next to that had no way of falling over came crashing down. And it almost fell directly on top of me. I was maybe 10 inches, I would say, a little bit to the left of it, so it didn't quite crush down on top of me. It was very terrifying. My adrenaline was rushing because though this pallet wouldn't have killed me or anything. It would have hurt a lot. Like, I probably would have gotten some bumps and scrapes and bruises from it. And after that, I told my manager, I don't like being back here by myself, and it's creepy. If I'm going to work these night shifts, someone has to be with me back there. And, she kind of got this funny look on her face, and she said, okay, that's fine. We've been needing more help anyways. We'll just double up the shift, bring somebody else in, and that's okay. Well, a little bit later, I had to go back there to just throw the trash away, because that's where the back receiving door is, and that's where all the trash went. So I go back there to throw the trash away. And this receiving door is a lot like a garage door that opens and closes. And there's a big lock that you would pull, and then you'd put a padlock in it. I went back there to put the trash by this door. I'm kind of standing there taking it in because, like I said, this area always kind of gave me the creeps. And I'd always kind of have to take a moment to kind of calm myself down and then get out of there. Well, as I'm standing there, I can hear a rattling. Like somebody is up against the door, pushing on the door, or trying to pull up on the door, because you can hear the chain of the door shaking back and forth. And it was a pretty evenly tempered day outside. It wasn't windy at all, which is very unusual for Oklahoma. For anyone who lives in Oklahoma, you know how it is. And we had security cameras. So I walked over to the monitor to see if there was somebody out there trying to get in. And I look out there, and as I'm looking out there, I don't see anybody. But I can see the door on the monitor rattling. And I can physically look at the door and watch it rattle. And it was terrifying. So, I ran out of there, went back up to the pharmacy. That was the last time I was going to take the trash out. That was going to have to be somebody else's responsibility for here on out. I would say those are probably the two biggest things that happened to me while I was there. There was some other minor things, like I would go to the employee bathroom. I would very clearly flip the lights on, but when I went into the stall, the lights would flip themselves off. When I would go into the pharmacy part to put medications back up on the shelves, a bottle from a couple rows down, it would fall off, hit the ground. Products would sometimes slide off the shelves, even if the shelves were, short and very flat with no angle. But like I said, I always felt this nasty presence. Like whatever was doing this was purposely doing this in order to mess with us, to like scare us or shock us or get some sort of pleasure out of seeing us scared. And I knew I wasn't the only one who felt this way. There were some other girls who worked there. They didn't want to go back there. They didn't want to stalk at night in the dark either. But for some reason, it was something that we never spoke of. Like, it was a very clear taboo to talk about how nasty the back room felt, or about the crazy little paranormal things that we had been experiencing in and around the store. Well, I decided to talk to my dad about it. My dad's a very no-nonsense person. He thinks very clearly. I figured maybe he would kind of help shed some light on my weird little stories, my experiences. And the way my dad replied to me was, he goes, "I'm not surprised." And I said, what do you mean by that? Why are you not surprised about these crazy things that keep happening? And he said, "Well, you were too young at the time to remember this." And I said, "Okay, Dad, what happened?" Well, it turns out, and you can still look up to this day on the internet, you can find this article on the Enid News and Eagle. about what happened in this store. The way it goes is a man who lived about 4 miles away from the store, he stabbed his wife, who he was trying to divorce. He stabbed her violently until she died. And she died in her house while their daughter was actually in the room over. Like, it was a very violent, very horrific thing that happened. This man then walks 4 miles to Evans Pharmacy. Now, Evans Pharmacy is a lot like, I don't know how to describe it, kind of like a Kmart in a way. They sell medications, general household goods, and they also sell sporting goods, which includes guns. This man, I guess, grief-stricken by what he did, he walks up to the counter and he asks one of the guys to see a shotgun. Well, he takes the shotgun and it turns out that he had a shotgun shell in his pocket. He loaded the gun and he shot himself in the front of the store. And it was very horrific. It was horrible. It was a very dark time for... Stop it, dog. Don't squeak your squeaker. It was a very dark time for the pharmacy and for Enid in general, because it is a small town. When things like that happen, it gets around very quickly. And one of the reasons why we never talked about the paranormal happenings, you know, it was something that was never talked about, was because my head manager and the pharmacist and even the man that worked at the sporting goods counter, they were all present when this happened. If you go into the front of the store and you look down at the tiles, you can actually see a very distinct, like, cleaning spot, like where someone has poured down tons and tons of bleach on these white tiles, well, more like off-white tiles, to get this area clean. Because it did happen in the front of the store. And, you know, after my dad tells me the story, you know, it's like, it clicks. I understand. I feel that nasty feeling. And I know deep down inside of myself that it is this man. You know, he's went through this traumatic event in our store. And I really do feel like part of him has stayed in this store. And he was not a nice man. So he has decided to, you know, spend his afterlife trying to make other people unhappy. You know, trying to influence the world that he's no longer a part of. So that's my story. It's not super long, but it does have, you know, a really nice background to it. Well, not really nice, but you know what I mean. And for all the listeners out there, if you do want to look up the article, just type into Google Evans Pharmacy, Enid, Oklahoma, suicide. And it'll be the first thing that comes up if you guys want to see that for yourself. Anywho, thanks for taking the time to listen to my little creepy story. I'm going to keep listening and take care.
If you enjoy the Anything Ghost show and you'd like to hear the complete archives going back to that very first show in January of 2006, then look into joining the Anything Ghost VIP group. There's a one-time membership fee, and that'll give you complete access of the online Anything Ghost archive. Go to anythingghost.com and then go to the Join the VIP group tab for more information. www.anythingghost.com, join the VIP group. A story from Marcy in Dallas, Texas. Shadow Feet. I grew up in an old church parsonage in a small Minnesota town. The house was close to 100 years old. One weekend when I was 16, I was at home alone. The day progressed without anything unusual happening. I went to bed. I forgot about what time, but fell asleep without incident. At exactly 2:11 a.m., I awoke suddenly. I felt scared for some reason, and lay there in bed silently listening for whatever had awakened me. Because our house was so old, there were many noises it made when certain things happened. And I memorized all of them as a teenager who liked to sneak out and knew how to avoid making noises. For instance, when an exterior door was opened or closed downstairs, all of the bedroom doors would rattle slightly from the change in air pressure. And there were certain steps on the stairs leading to the bedroom that would creak when stepped on. At first, I heard nothing when I woke up. But then something happened that made my blood run cold. I heard the door to our garage downstairs slam shut. It was metal and hollow cord, and was very distinct, so there was no mistaking the sound as something else. I had locked that door when I went to bed. And of course, because the door closed downstairs, my bedroom door upstairs rattled immediately afterward. I thought it might be my imagination, perhaps part of a dream sticking with me. So I tried to calm myself, but continued to listen intently. Not long after the door slammed, I heard someone slowly walking up the stairs leading to my bedroom. Each step that would always creak when pressure was placed on it did so. Now I was terrified. Someone had broken into the house. This was back before the days of cell phones, so I had no way to call for help. I began to think about how I could hide or escape. But my room was at the very top of the stairs, and there was no way. In the hallway outside my bedroom, my mom always kept a nightlight burning. Again, because the house was so old, there were big gaps at the bottom of the bedroom doors, so you could see the light shining underneath from inside the rooms. As the intruder got to the top of the stairs, everything went quiet again. By now, I had put my head under my covers and was trying not to breathe loudly, hoping whoever it was would not hear me. I didn't hear another sound for several minutes, and I finally made myself come out from under the covers and look over at my door. From underneath, I saw the shadow of 2 feet standing directly outside my bedroom, blocking the light from the nightlight. My eyes went wide, my mouth went dry. I dove back under the covers, crying now. I was a dead girl for sure. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, but who knows how long it was. No other noises were made. I ventured a peek over at the door again, just one eyeball from under my blanket. Nothing. The shadow feet were gone. There was only the full glow of the nightlight. How did I miss the person walking away? Again, I waited for what seemed like forever. And finally I decided I would rather get up and confront whoever it was rather than wait all night for him to kill me. I have no idea where this 16-year-old girl got the bravery to do this, but I got out of my bed and threw my bedroom door open. Nothing in the hallway. All the other doors were closed, as I had left them when I went to bed. One by one, I crept into each room, checking closets and under beds. Nobody was there. I quietly walked downstairs now armed with a plunger from the bathroom as a weapon. I couldn't find anything out of place, or a strange person, anywhere downstairs either. Lastly, I checked the garage door and front door. Both were locked from inside. I was alone. I never found out what or who those shadow feet belonged to. Many times after that night, I would feel as if someone was watching me or following me in the house. I began to talk out loud and tell whatever it was that I was okay with them being in the house, but please don't scare me again. I never had another experience quite like that one. A couple years later, a boyfriend I had at the time revealed to me that one night when he slept over with me at the house, he woke up at 2:11 and saw shadow feet under my door. He thought he was just seeing things, so he rolled over and went back to sleep and didn't tell me. A story from Cassandra in Canada. Haunted childhood home. I grew up in a home that was over 100 years old in a small town in Canada. When my parents purchased the house 30 plus years ago, it was the sort of town where everyone knew everyone. It was a tight-knit community. So, when they moved into the house, the previous owner's son very quickly greeted them. My parents always welcomed the son into the home and gladly listened to stories of days gone past, good times in the house, fond childhood memories, and eventually, the previous tenants of our new house. We came to learn that the son's parents had both passed away at one point in our home, both of natural causes. Knowing this never frightened any of us. Possibly, at that point, we hadn't had any bad experiences. The previous tenants, however, purchased the home and within 6 months had put it back on the market and hurriedly moved out. Apparently, they refused to go in the basement after something had happened. We never did find out what that something was. That being said, the following events are a few of the more memorable experiences I personally had in my childhood home. From a very young age, I vividly remember hearing footsteps coming from upstairs when we were on the main floor. Sometimes they were slow. Other times it sounded like people were dancing. Upstairs seemed to have the most activity generally. At 16, I was sitting on my bed talking on the phone when I heard slow, intentional footsteps coming toward my room. Thinking it had been a nephew who had been over visiting, I called out to him. No response. Once I quieted, the footsteps sounded closer, so I called down to my mother. She shouted up that my nephew had left a half hour or so ago. I froze. I was paralyzed with fear because at that point, the footsteps sounded like they were just outside my door. Mustering up all of my courage, I ran downstairs and, of course, relayed to my mother what had happened. Years later, I had given birth to my own child. My daughter was almost a year old when we decided to move. Our new home wasn't going to be ready for a while, so, in the interim, we moved in with my parents. Because my daughter was still young, we kept a baby monitor in her room, with the receiving end moving between the kitchen and the main floor, and then to our bedroom when we headed upstairs for the night. One afternoon, I had put her down for a nap. My parents, husband, and myself were sitting in the kitchen chatting over coffee when the lights on the monitor started to flicker. The more noise in the room with the baby, the more the lights would light up on the receiving end. We all froze. and listened for a whimper or a cry. Instead, we heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor upstairs. My daughter never made a peep, and eventually the lights died down and everything fell silent again. In the same time frame, staying with my parents, one night after we had turned off the light in our own room to go to sleep, quiet and on the brink of sleep, out of nowhere, I felt like someone was standing over the bed. This was quickly followed by labored breathing directly in my ear. There were many other things that happened in that house in my 17 years there. Some things stand out more than others, and things still happen to this day. It feels as though the house has a life of its own. Sometimes, when we head into the basement, we sound out a warning that we are on our way down. Not out of fear, it's just become a ritual over the years. The things that happened in that house generally don't feel sinister. Rather, it feels as though the home is shared by more than those who can be seen. And a story from Joseph in Alabama. The room behind the fireplace. I worked a summer job for a guy from my church. He and his wife owned a hardware store the next town over. They needed someone to replace his elderly mother at the store. My first day started normally. When I walked in, his wife was behind the counter, and she said her husband was out playing golf with one of the business partners. Later in the day, he called the store, maybe about 1 or 2, specifically looking for me. His wife called me to the phone, and he told me that someone had rented out a small industrial fan that we kept in the back. I needed to load it up in my truck and take it to their house. So I loaded it up and put the address in my GPS. The house was only 5 minutes down the road, and it looked fairly normal when I pulled into the driveway. It was a small 1-story brick house that looked like it was built in the late 60s. I got the fan and climbed up the steps to the front door and knocked. A lady in her early 30s opened the door. She was obviously late in pregnancy. This is important later on. And she let me in. As soon as I stepped in, I got an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread. But I brushed it off, because after all, I was doing my job. She told me to put the fan in the living room, so I headed into the living room. It was void of all furnishings due to the renovation. I noticed there was a stone fireplace. It was a few feet away from the door that led to a small room behind the fireplace. She told me to put the fan inside that small room to air it out. I stepped into the room, and I instantly felt like something didn't want me in that room. It hated my guts. It was such a sudden change that I almost fell. I put the fan down and got out of the room. Once outside of the room, I leaned up against the fireplace to regain my balance. The lady then came back to the living room. I guess she heard me stumble. She asked me if I was all right, and I assured her I was. She then turned to me and said, "You know, I probably should have warned you about that." Confused, I asked her what she was talking about. "The feeling in that room," she replied. "I feel the hateful feeling in there too, although it doesn't knock me down," she said with a chuckle. I then realized, in my haste, I had neglected to plug in the fan, so I returned to that room. This time I braced for the feeling. But it didn't feel as strong. It was still there, just weaker. I plugged in the fan into the outlet, to the left of the door, and then went to switch it on. As soon as I touched the switch on the fan, all those feelings came back, this time stronger. I felt like I was being watched, surrounded even, and the same feeling of not being welcome swept over me. I quickly exited. Once outside of the room, I told the lady what I'd felt. I then advised her not to use the room for anything, and that if I were in that situation, I would leave. She told me about how she came to rent the house for a low price, and she needed a place to stay for her upcoming family, and that she had no other choice. We continued the conversation, and I told her that my boss would pick up the fan tomorrow, because I was off that day. After that, I left. I have never been so happy to leave a place. When I returned to the store, I told my boss's wife about what happened, and she looked at me, startled. On Monday, when I came back to work, she called me over to the counter where she liked to sit. "I found something out about the house you went to," she said. She then proceeded to tell me that an elderly lady had once lived there. 2 men, who had recently been released from a mental institution, had been renting the house next door to her. One afternoon, the 2 men killed the elderly lady in her home and threw her body in the storm cellar. I have no idea why that one particular room seems to be haunted, because it wasn't the storm cellar. But it did explain the feelings in the house. Needless to say, I refused to go to that home for anything. And that's it for Anything Ghost show number 248. If you have a story you want to share, a personal ghost story, or a local ghost legend, send them to lex@anythingghost.com or go to anythingghost.com and fill out the contact or send a story form. And for everything Anything Ghost, go to www.anythingghost.com. And there, you can also find more information about joining the VIP group so you can have access to the complete Anything Ghost archives. anythingghost.com, join the VIP group. Thanks, everyone.